you. So, hello everyone. So I'm going to be talking about creating PHP extensions with C++ easily. And first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Carlos Granados. I come from sunny Spain, and I work for a UK company in the aviation industry as a backend developer. I've been working with them for almost 7 years now. And I've been developing code for a very, very long time. I have almost 40 years of developer experience. My 40th year is next year, so that would be a good anniversary. So I've done a lot. I've done gaming, I've done e-commerce, I've done backend, frontend, you name it, I've done it. And I can say that I'm really a PHP expert. You know, I've been working with PHP since 2005. And I've done many, many different things in PHP. I have a lot of experience there. And my main experience is with the Symfony framework. I've been working with Symfony since 2010. I started with Symfony 2. It was very brand new at that point. And I was one of the first 100 developers to be certified for Symfony 2. So that makes me happy as well, and makes me an experienced Symfony developer. I'm not a very experienced C++ developer. I used to do C++ at the beginning of my career when I was doing games, but then I spent maybe 20 or 30 years not touching C++ again. And then I've started using it again now to build some PHP extensions. So I can write C++ code, but I don't consider myself an expert. And if you start talking to me about things like operator overloading, templates, multiple inheritance, then my brain starts to hurt, and I look somewhere else. So I can do basic C++, let's say. I'm also the creator of FastDebug, the fastest PHP debugger. This is a new tool, which is a drop-in replacement for Xdebug. It's fully compatible, but it is much, much faster, like 30 times faster. Right now, this tool was built with a PHP-C++ library that I'm going to talk about. We're looking for beta users, so if you're interested in this, please take a look at the website. So, what is a PHP extension? Let's start with this. A PHP extension is a library or a plugin that extends the capabilities of PHP. It can provide many different things. It can provide additional functions, it can provide additional classes, it can interact with external libraries, or it can even modify PHP's internal working. They're usually written in C. They follow a very specific interface, a set of standards, and they can be compiled statically or dynamically. This means that they can be loaded with PHP itself. So when you start PHP, they are already there. Or they can be loaded at runtime by adding an extension statement to your PHP ini file. Then it will be loaded whenever PHP is started. So some examples of PHP extensions include the international extension, which provides international capabilities like locales and things like that. Curl, that provides the ability to load URLs. PDO MySQL, that lets you connect to MySQL databases. libxml, that lets you work with XML. Opcache is one of the most interesting PHP extensions because it actually improves a lot the performance of PHP. So that's one of the extensions that is actually interacting with PHP internals. Or Xdebug, which is a debugger that lets you debug your code. Why would you write a PHP extension? There are many reasons for this. One of them is that you may want to interact with external libraries or tools, which are usually written in C. So for example, the Mongo extension was built to interact with the libmongc and the libbison libraries, which are libraries that are built in C and that allow you to interact with MongoDB. So we built this extension so that we could talk to these libraries that in turn talk to MongoDB, and so that we are able to work in PHP with MongoDB. Another reason may be to restrict access to your source code. Your extension is going to be compiled, and it's much more difficult to reverse engineer some code that is compiled than if you need to provide source code. So if you have some code that is proprietary, that is secret, and you need to distribute your PHP code somehow, maybe putting the part that is proprietary or that is secret into a C extension is the right thing to do, because in that way it would be hidden from the final users. The main reason, usually, for creating PHP extensions is to increase the performance of your code. Compiled C code can be 10 times faster than its equivalent PHP code. So if you have some part of your code that is critical to the performance of your system. There's a serializer, there's something that talks to an external device, and it needs to be as fast as possible. Then maybe you want to write an extension for that so that it runs as fast as possible. And you may also want to write an extension to actually modify the capabilities of the PHP language itself. There are many ways in which it can be extended. One example, for example, would be the IG binary extension, which is an extension that replaces the standard PHP serializer with a binary serializer. So instead of serializing things as strings, they are serialized as binary blobs, which makes them smaller, and it's also faster than the standard serializer. So there are many ways in which the PHP language can be extended, and there are many extensions for doing that. So how do you usually write a PHP extension? I'm going to put here a couple of links if you want to take a picture of that. You won't find a lot of information in the web about writing PHP extensions. There's very, very limited information. I think these are the two main links that you will find. The first one is, I would say, a bit more basic. It gives you the overview and the general details of writing PHP extensions, while the second one goes more into the details, the finer details, and the ugly details. In fact, if you read the second one, your brain may hurt a little bit because it's quite complex writing these extensions. But basically, the process itself is quite easy. You just need to set up a build environment. You need a C compiler. You can generate an extension skeleton. There are tools for doing that. And then you just add your C code to there. You need to follow some predefined rules, some standards. There are some macros that you can use to help you build your extension. Then you just compile it and link it using a C compiler and a linker. And then you load the extension like any other extension, like you would load the XDebug or whatever. So what's wrong with this, with using the, let's say, a standard way of building C extensions for PHP? So first of all, it requires a very deep knowledge of the Sense engine. That's the core engine of PHP, and especially of all the data structures and things that are used to represent things internally. So for example, you need to know how variables are defined in the C, in the core engine. You need to know how objects are defined. You need to know how hashes of objects are kept. You need to know how all of this information is passed around. And this information is really complex, and it's not very well documented anywhere. So you need to start learning about all of this, which is really, really complex. Then we have the thing that the Sense engine itself is a real mess. And I mean that the code, if you start looking into it, it's so complex that it can literally blow you off. Because, you know, there are things like pointers to pointers to pointers. There are data structures which are unions, which have several things in memory at the same time. It's so complex, you know, whenever I look at the PHP source code, it's like, oh, wow, why is this like that? There are reasons for this, you know, there are historical reasons for why the source code of PHP is like that. It has taken many years to develop, it has been developed by many different people, and there are reasons for this, and there are some very good efforts to improve the quality of this code. The PHP people right now are doing an amazing job of refactoring things, making them more stable, making more of them knowledgeable, and so there's a real effort being done to improve this, but right now it's still a mess and a code which is very, very difficult to look into. And there's very little documentation about it. And it requires you to use some very complex macros, because, you know, this structures are so complex that you need to start using these macros, and when you start looking at the source code of these macros, it's like, oh, I don't understand a thing. What is this doing? So if you need to look at the internals, then it's going to be quite difficult for you. And finally, you don't have access to any kind of standard libraries, like for memory management, data structures, arrays, maps. You don't have that. Everything is home-built in PHP. They built everything from scratch, so you need to learn all the things that PHP uses to deal with the code. So in summary, it is bloody hard. So don't worry. PHP-C++ to the rescue. Who doesn't love a superhero? So what is PHP-C++? PHP-C++ is an open source C++ library that helps you develop PHP extensions easily. It provides a collection of C++ classes, very well documented and easy to use C++ classes that allow you to build a native extension in C++. It removes all the complexity of dealing with the Zen engine internals because it takes care of all the ugly details for you. It provides a very simple interface so that you don't need to learn about all these data structures and functions and everything. It simplifies all of these for you so that you can really concentrate on the functionality of your extension. And it allows you to access all the thousands of existing C++ library for things like data management, memory management, interfacing with other hardware. There's literally thousands of libraries that you can use. And C++ is a very mature and a very efficient language. So once you start using it, it feels really comfortable to use. So what do you need to use PHP-C++? The first thing that you may want to do is read the documentation. There's a website with all the documentation. And I have to say that this documentation is really good. You know, I always like when I go to a place and the documentation really makes sense. And you look into it and it's like, oh, wow, yes, I understand this. It's not like, oh, I've read this, but I haven't understood a thing. In this case, the documentation is very, very good, and it explains all the little details very, very nicely. So take a read, because it's very, very interesting. Next thing that you need to do is you need to clone the Git repo for this extension. You will notice that I've put here a URL that includes the fast debug organization. I'll explain why later. Then you need some build tools. You need a C++ compiler, you need a linker, you need make, you need some tools. So basically, you need the basic set of tools that you will need to compile and link C++ code. There are usually some packages that you can install for your operating system. So for example, if you're in Linux, you can do something like apt install build essentials. That's a package that includes all the compiler, the linker, make, and everything that you would need to build. But whatever is available for your system, if you're on Alpine, it's going to be something different, and Mac OS is going to be something different. So depending, you need to install whatever it is so that you have this compiler and everything in your system. Then you need to have a PHP install as well, because you need access to all the PHP header files, and you need to be able to link against them. Right now, PHP-C++ supports PHP 7 and forward. So it supports up until 8.2. There's an old version of PHP-C++ that supports PHP 5, but I wouldn't really recommend using it. It's very old, it hasn't been maintained in years, so it's like PHP 5. So if you really need it, there's something for it, but I wouldn't recommend using it. And right now, PHP-C++ is available for Linux and Macs. It doesn't support Windows. This is something that may throw you off. But right now, it's only available on these operating systems. There are some efforts being made so that PHP-C++ can compile on Windows, but right now it doesn't work. So how would you compile an extension with PHP-C++? This is usually a two-step process. The first thing that you need to do is compile the PHP-C++ library itself. You would usually do that by, as I said, cloning the repo, and then you install it in some folder, and then you go there and you run make and make install. What this is going to do is it's going to compile all the different files of PHP-C++, it's going to link them, and it's going to install two things. One of them is going to install this library into your library folder in your computer, and it's going to install some headers that are needed in the header folder in your computer. And this is usually only needed to be done once, because once you have the library compiled, unless you get a new version or you modify it somehow, you only need to compile it once, and it's going to be available for all your extensions and all your projects. The next thing that you need to do is compile the extension itself. So what you do is you write some C++ code in another project, and then you link with this library that you created previously, and you use the headers that were created when you created the library. PHP-C++ provides some example make files that you can use, and you can modify them to suit the system that you have. They're created really for Linux systems, but you can, if there's some special things for the linker or for the compiler, whatever, you can modify them and do whatever you need. And with this make file, you usually run make. This will compile your C++ files, and you run make install. And make install, what it will do is it will take the compile extension and it will copy into the extension folder of your PHP implementation so that it's ready to be loaded. And once you have the extension compiled and in your PHP extension folder, the only thing that you need to do is to really load it into PHP. You do that by adding an extension equals whatever the name of your extension is, .so, in the case, for example, of Linux. This will find the extension and load it for you with PHP. Let's look at the code that you actually write to create your extension. The first thing that you need to do is you need to declare a module. A module is what PHP calls an extension, really. So PHP has a list of modules, and they include the internal modules that come from with PHP, and any external modules that you may have loaded, like the MySQL extension or the Xdebug extension, whatever. So we need to declare a module so that PHP knows that we're adding another extension to it. And you do that in a C++ file. We include the headers that were created for us with the PHP-C++ library. And then we create a function which is called getModule. This function is called by PHP for every module that it loads. This needs to be a C function because it's going to interface with C with PHP itself. So that's why I'm saying this extern thing, C thing. But this is the only place that needs to be in C. Everything else can be in C++. And PHP-C++ library will take care of making it available for PHP. So here you can see that what I'm doing is I'm creating an instance of the PHP extension class, which is a class that is provided by PHP-C++. And then I'm just saying the name of the extension, the version, and I'm returning this object to the getModule function. In that way, PHP knows that I've loaded this new module that is called my extension, the version, and that it's available to be used. So if I now, for example, run php/m, that's a command that you use to get all the modules loaded by PHP, it will be in the list. You will see all the modules, including Xdebug or whatever, and one of the modules will be my extension. So your extension is loaded. This by itself is not very useful, so you need to actually do something with it. The way to do something with your extension is usually by registering new native functions. These are functions that can be called by the PHP code and which are provided by your extension. The way to register a native function is you define a C++ function in your code. For example, here I'm defining this hello world function. And this function will do something. And then in your get module, you add the function to the extension before it's returned. You can see here that I'm saying, OK, I'm using this function, hello world, and it's going to be called hello world. These two names can be different. This is the C++ name, and this is the name that PHP will use to identify it. They don't need to be the same. They can be different. So I could call it hello world PHP, for example. But usually they are the same to keep a bit consistent about this. When you do this, then PHP knows about your function, and you can use it. So if, for example, I do something like this. This is a PHP program. I call the new hello world function. And when you run this, you get hello world, and everything is great. As you can see, this is not very useful, so I'm trying to keep it simple. But it shows you that you can create functions that return things to PHP. Another thing that you may want to do is return a different kind of value. Excuse me, return a value, and not accept a value. Sorry. So in this case, I've got a function that is going to return a value to PHP. You do this by defining a C++ function that returns an instance of PHP value class. This is a C++ class that's defined by your library. And this is what PHP-C++ uses to let PHP know that it's returning something that it can use. it will automatically convert it for you into something that PHP understands. One of these complicated structures that I told you about, this is going to convert this simple class that you have defined here into something that PHP can use. And it's intelligent enough to know the type of the things that you want to return and to convert it automatically. So for example, in this case, I'm going to be returning an integer, and then PHP-C++ knows that it's this, and when it returns it to PHP, it's going to be typed like a number, so that PHP knows what it's getting back when it's being returned. So in this case, I'm just, again, adding this function here, and then if I use it in PHP code, I'm going to be getting a value back, and then I can use it in the same way that I would use the return value from any other PHP function. In this case, it's returning a random number between 0 and 36. So if you've got this program, then you can get rich at the casino. And so I expect 20% back, please. Another thing that you may want to do with your function is you may want to accept parameters. This is a bit more different from PHP because you don't list the parameters that you want to accept. You don't say this function accepts an integer and a string. You always receive an array of parameters. Well, I say an array. It's not actually an array. In the C++ world, this is a vector, but it's like an array. So let's call it an array. And then you can use the parameters that you have received in this array individually. So for example, in this case, I'm getting the first param, and I'm expecting it to be an integer, and I'm getting the second one, and expecting to be a string. So I built this little function that will just repeat a string a number of times. This is probably not the best implementation, but I just wanted to keep it simple. So it just concatenates the strings as many times as you have defined in the call. When you declare this function in your get module thing, you don't need to, because in PHP, a lot of things are optional. In this case here, you can declare the number and the type of the parameters that you are expecting to get. So in this case here, I'm saying that I'm getting this, I'm expecting this function, repeat string, to receive a number, numeric, with the name num, and a string with the name text. And then PHP knows about this, and it will enforce this. So if, for example, you try to pass an integer as the second parameter, it's going to complain that this is not allowed in your function. As I said, this is all optional, but you can declare this. Then you can use it in your PHP code. So for example, here I have I'm calling this function with an integer and then a string, and then I get the result back. And when I print it, it's like the result of repeating hello 3 times. Hello, 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 and then goodbye. Another thing that you can do, apart from passing scalars like strings or integers, you can pass objects. You can define that your function is going to accept a specific type of object. So for example, I can say that my parameter time is going to accept a daytime. The second parameter here, so the first one is the name of your parameter, and the second one is the name of the class that it's going to accept. It should be the fully qualified name, so if it has a namespace, it should be the full namespace here that you would use. Another thing that you can do is you can define if a parameter is optional or is required. By default, all parameters that you define are required, but you can add this false thing here, and it will let PHP know that this is an optional parameter. And you can also pass parameters by reference. So you can see that I have been using this by val function all the time. This means that this parameter is being passed by value. But if you want to pass a parameter by reference, you can do it as well. And for example, in this case, if you pass this text parameter to your function as a string, if you modify the thing in your function, then PHP, it will be modified on the PHP side as well. So again, this is all very similar to how you would do things in PHP. From your C++ code, you can call PHP functions. So you may be building something, and you may want to do some array manipulation. You may want to call something to get something from the database, whatever. And there are many ways of calling PHP functions. One of them is that PHP-C++ defines for you The main functions that are mostly used in PHP define something like 50 different functions, and it provides direct access to them, so that you can directly call them something like this. I'm calling the array keys function. It's defined for me, and I just pass it an array, and it works like the PHP side. It's just calling it like that. So this is for the most used internal functions, but you can actually call any kind of PHP function. You use the syntax, you use this PHP call thing. This is the name of the function, and then a list of parameters. You don't need to add one if you don't need it. So for example, instead of here, I could say PHP call array keys, and then the array that I'm going to send it to use. If you have an object that you have defined in your PHP C++ code, a C++ object, then you can call a method on it. This is what I'm doing here. So I've created an object of the type datetime, and I'm calling the format method on this with a parameter, and then this is going to be like calling the same function in PHP to get the formatted datetime. If you get a parameter that is a function, like in here, it will be a callback, and you can call it directly in this way. So I'm assuming that this parameter that was passed to me is a function, then I can use it as a function by just calling it and then passing some parameters. And finally, in PHP, we have this special syntax where you can create an array with an object and a string, and this can be used to call a method on that object. So for example, here, I'm creating this array, which includes the object that I defined earlier, which is a datetime object, and the format, name of the method. So whenever I use this array, it's actually calling format on the time object. So this is exactly the same as doing this here. So you can see that within your your C++ code, you can call any kind of external PHP functions, and gives you access to all the PHP side of the world. A really interesting thing is that it is very, very easy to create PHP classes in your C++ code. These are classes that PHP will be able to use. It's like when you have this datetime class, which is part of PHP, you could try to create an equivalent in your C++ code and create a class that PHP itself can use. The way to do it is to create a C++ class, but you declare that it extends this PHP base class. In that way, PHP-C++ will know that it needs to do all the magic so that this class is available for the PHP side of the world. Then this is just a standard C++ class. You can define private properties, you can define functions on it, and this is all C++ code. If you want to use one of these functions on the PHP side, you need to expect to receive an array of parameters, as I said before, and you need to return a PHP value so that it's returned properly to PHP. And then when you declare this function in your get module, what you do is you instantiate this class, you create a counter class here, you give the name of the class in PHP, and you can add the methods that are declared on this function so that they can be seen on the PHP side of the world. Then you add this class to the extension and return it. And in that way, this class that you have created becomes available on the PHP side of the world. So for example, here, I can create a new instance of this counter class that I declare on my extension, and then I can call some methods on it. So for example, here, I started with a 0 counter, I incremented twice, decrement 1, so the final value is going to be 1. And this behaves like any other class that you have available in your PHP code. And it's not different from any other class that you may declare in your PHP side of the thing. More things about creating PHP classes. You can, of course, declare some of the methods receive some parameters. So for example, if I have a function which is called increment by on my counter class, which receives a parameter which is by how much I need to increment it, then when I declare it, I can declare that it has one parameter, which is called change, which is going to be numeric, and I pass by value, and it's going to be available here in this function so that I can use it on the C++ side of the thing. And you can also declare the visibility of a function. So for example, I've declared here that this function, reset counter, is private and final. Not very useful, I know, to declare a private function, so because what you want to do is to use it on the PHP side, and a private function is not very useful, but you can do these kind of things, and you can declare that it's protected or whatever you need. Another thing that you can do on your C++ code is create PHP objects that you may want to use in the same way that you would use them in the PHP side. The way to do this is to use this PHP object class, and you create an instance of it, and then you say the name of the PHP class that you want to instantiate. So in this case here, I'm going to create an instance of this counter class that I declared previously, and it will be available for my C++ code to use as I like. I can create instances of classes that I have created myself, but I can actually create instances of any PHP class. So I can create, for example, an instance of a datetime object. You can pass some parameters when you're creating it. And you can even create classes that have been defined by the user. If you know the name of any class that the user has defined, then you can create an instance of it, and it's available for you the same way that any internal function, class, would be available for you. So I don't want to go any deeper into what PHP C++ can do. I just wanted to give a brief introduction so that you get a sense of what you can do and how things are done. But PHP C++ actually supports many other PHP language elements. So for example, it supports closure functions. It supports constructors. When you build a class, you're able to accept parameters and do things with them. It supports inheritance, so you can extend classes and create classes that extend other classes. Supports interfaces, so you can create classes that implement some kind of interface, and it will enforce everything that is related to an interface. Supports namespaces, so you can define your classes within any specific namespace, and it will be used the same way that you will do on the PHP side. It supports magic methods, so things like magic get methods, magic set methods, and any kind of magic methods. They are provided in your classes that you create. Of course, it supports static functions and properties. There's a way to define them, and they will be available as static functions and properties on this C++, this PHP, on this class that you declare. It supports global and class constants that can be added both to a global namespace or to your class. Something very interesting is that it's very easy to load settings from PHP-ini so that you can customize the behavior of your extension by the user by just adding some values that you define, and it's very easy to load them and get the values and do something with them. And also a very interesting thing is that it provides support for exceptions in two ways. One of them is that it can intercept exceptions which are being thrown by the PHP code and do things with them. And it can also throw these exceptions so that they are used by the PHP side of the things. So, conclusions about PHP C++. It is very easy and intuitive to use. You have seen that the examples that I've shown are not showing very complex code. When you work with PHP C++, it feels easy and it doesn't feel complicated to build things. And it fully hides the complexity of the PHP internals. You really don't need to know about the send engine, the send structure, how they're organized. And this is all hidden from you. And you can learn about it. It's quite interesting. But you don't actually need to learn about this to use the extension. It doesn't really require a deep knowledge of C++. This is all built with very basic C++. You can, of course, use a more advanced functionality if you want to start using operator overloading or whatever. It's available. It's C++ after all. But to create these extensions really requires some really basic knowledge of C++. So even if you are a PHP developer, you should be able to create this kind of extensions, because in the end, it almost feels like writing PHP code. A lot of the things that I've been doing here, like defining parameters, like defining classes, defining the type of parameters, defining return values, it feels like what we do on the PHP side of the world all the time. It doesn't feel strange. It doesn't feel like you're doing weird stuff. And the familiarity of all this, I think it helps a lot when you're using this library. So, some caveats about PHP-C++. Not everything is rosy, and this is not like the rainbow, and we are all happy, and we will be happy ever after. There are some problems with the library. I think that one of the main problems is that it's not very well maintained. It's almost abandoned. So I wouldn't say fully abandoned, because from time to time they merge a pull request. But I would say that in the last 2-3 years, there's been very, very little activity in the library. So what I've done, since I've been using this library a lot, I have created a fork, which is going to be maintained and updated. In this fork, I have merged all the latest pull requests that were pending for a long time, and it has been updated for PHP 8, PHP 8.1, and PHP 8.2. That's why when I listed the link before for the repo of the library, I listed it under the fast debug organization, because this is where the fork is kept. So if you want to use this library, I recommend that you use this fork, because this is the most modern and really maintained side of the library. But it's a problem, you know, because I'm not the creator of the library, so I don't know everything about it. I'm doing my best, and as I said, I'm not a C++ developer, so I'm kind of keeping up, but it's not ideal, I understand. PHP-C++ doesn't support the full range of aspects of the PHP language. It supports a lot. You know, I've listed many, many things that it supports, but it doesn't support everything. So if you need to do weird stuff with PHP, you may find that some of these things are not supported. And especially, a lot of the things that are available in PHP 8 are not supported. So things like enums or read-only properties, nothing of this is currently. Hopefully, in the future, it will be supported. So if you need to use these things, then it might be a problem as well. Probably you won't need to use them. I think it's strange that your extension is going to need to use them, but if you need that, it can be a problem. Also, there's the problem of how these extensions can be distributed. Usually, PHP extensions are distributed as source code. They're usually distributed using the PECL packaging system. So they get downloaded into your system and then get compiled in your system, and you get your specific version for your specific version of the operating system. Given how these extensions are built, you first need to build the PHP C++ library, then you need to build your code, and you need a special makefile. It means that you cannot really distribute them as source code, or unless you provide some very specific instructions. So you will usually need to distribute them as precompiled extensions, which may be fine. You know, if you know that your code is going to be running on Alpine 17 under PHP 7, then you just compile for that, and that's fine. So you need to know that it cannot be distributed as easily as other extensions. Of course, it's not available in Windows, so if you need Windows availability, it's going to be a big problem. And I would say that PHP-C++ is best when you're building internal extensions. It's extensions that are going to only be used in your own project, in your own system, that you don't need to distribute publicly to a lot of people, but are being mostly used internally by the thing that you're building. In that case, that's perfect, because you control the operating system, you control the PHP version, you control how it's being distributed. So a lot of the disadvantages of using PHP-C++ can be avoided. What other alternatives do you have to using PHP-C++? Well, one of them, of course, is building extensions in the traditional way, and good luck with that. But there are also some other alternatives. There's a way of writing PHP extensions in Rust. This is quite new, and you can find the documentation here. There's a talk tomorrow that is also going to talk about writing extension, and that is going to use Rust to write extensions. So if you're interested on that side, you can look at the talk tomorrow. And it's a different way of doing things, depending on what you're more familiar with, and it provides different capabilities, but you have this alternative. There's something which is called Zephyr, and it's a PHP-like language. It's not actually PHP. It's very similar to PHP. It's PHP-based, and this language can be compiled into PHP extensions. You can see the website here. the good thing about using something like this is it's going to be more familiar to you as PHP developers. The bad side is not as powerful as using something like PHP, C++. So if you think that you're going to be, you'll find yourself better in something that looks more like PHP, then maybe this is for you. And then finally, we can use something which is called the PHP foreign function interface. This is something that was added, I think it was in PHP 7.4. And it's a way of PHP calling C functions defined in external libraries. It's quite complex to use. I've looked at the documentation. It's not easy to use at all, but it may be an alternative of building an extension, because it provides a way, if what you actually need is not other capabilities offered by extension, but mostly connect to an external library, then this can be the thing that you may want to use. And that's it. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
One at the back. Just give me 1 second.
I want to ask about two specific things that come to mind, whether it's possible to achieve them with the PHP-CPP library. One is if you can somehow integrate your classes that you create in your extensions with native operations. So for example, you'd have like some complicated number type, and you would do mathematical operations on it.
Well, this actually behaves like any PHP class that you define. So if you're able to define a PHP class and use it in some way, then you can do the same with the classes that you define on your C++ side. There's no difference, actually. And the kind of things that you can do with them are similar. So it would be difficult to build something like what you're suggesting, because this would require some kind of operator overloading, which is not really available in the PHP world. But as I said, it's really whatever you can do with a standard PHP class, you can do one of these classes. So anything that you can imagine you can do with a PHP class, then that's what you will be able to do with this.
Okay, thanks. And another thing is if you can somehow react to classes that user defines in PHP and some specific function, some specific methods that they would have, like essentially creating support for your own magic methods. Like you would have like some kind of a special initialization method on your class, or maybe using the attributes or something like that. So basically implementing what some of the frameworks do, but with your extensions.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's a good question, and specifically about attributes. I don't think that this library currently supports them, so I think that you are not going to get information about attributes in the classes that you define. I would need to check it up, but I think it doesn't actually support. And again, the answer is the same. These classes do not have anything special. They will behave like PHP classes, so you can do whatever you can do with a PHP class is what you will be able to do on this side. There's a part of the library that lets you connect a little bit with the more inner side of a PHP, because it lets you run some functions when some things happen on the PHP side. So for example, you can run a function when a request is initiated. You can run a function when a PHP statement is run. So you can work on that side of things. But then things start getting very, very complex. And then you leave all the easy side of this extension when you need to start doing things like that. And then maybe it doesn't make sense to use this library if you're going to build more complicated stuff. In that case, maybe it makes more sense to actually go into the core C code, learn about the structures, and use that directly instead of using this.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Oh, sorry, can I pass the mic down?
How would you recommend bringing extensions into your PHP CI/CD pipeline?
I've actually done this with the extension that I've built. So what you need to do is you need to add a build step to your pipeline so that your extension is built as part of the process. So what you usually do is that before running any test or running any code, you build your extension. You need to do these 2 steps because you're usually running on a CI environment which doesn't have this library. So first of all, you need to build the PHP-C++ library. Then you need to build your extension. And then this is available for your PHP code. So your next steps, which may be running PHP unit, maybe running end-to-end testing, maybe doing stuff with your code, is going to be able to use this extension that you built. So you need to add these previous steps that create the library and build the extension itself so that it's available for your next steps in your pipeline.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question, if that's all right.
Go for it.
Do you have any sort of good indicators of what would be or wouldn't be a good candidate for getting performance increase out of using a extension?
I've done some tests myself. I did because I thought that I could include in this talk some examples of code and see how fast it's run. But in the end, I decided to leave it out of the talk. And I did some tests with some algorithms, sorting algorithms and things like that. And I got something between 10 and 30 times faster using C++ rather than using PHP. So you can get a very big improvement in performance when doing things like this.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? No? Oh, right at the back. It's okay. It'll keep me fit.
Run.
I just wanted to ask about the INI stuff. Are you saying that you can dynamically add INI settings in the code that you write in PHP-C++, or is it?
Yeah. You can define them. So what you do is in this get module function, you define the INI settings that you can accept. You define the names of them, and then in your C++ code, you can get them. There's a function that will allow you to get, I don't know, my extension dot value, and it will provide the value for you, and then you can do something with it.
Okay, but you could, in theory, override INI settings from other extensions?
No, you cannot do that. PHP doesn't allow you to define the name of an INI property twice. So if you try to do that, it won't load your extension, which means that you cannot do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions? No? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
So, yeah, I think that's a really awesome library. I've never seen that before, but I think it's something that I'll be looking into. So, yeah. Round of applause for Carlos.
Thank you.